Learning to Quilt the Easy Way is a 4-part teaching series that will lead you in a clear, concise way through all the steps of quilt making, from the very basics to more complicated designs and techniques. Sharon Hultgren, an internationally known quilting teacher, designer, and author, presents her unique method and the easy tools which simplify quilt making while maintaining the accuracy needed to produce beautiful, high-quality quilts. In this third tape of the series, Exploring New Shapes, Sharon teaches how to measure and cut trapezoids and 45-degree diamonds. You will also learn the secrets for setting these shapes together. The quilt designs featured in this lesson are attic windows, reflections, 8-pointed star, and double diamond star. Now Sharon will give you a preview of all the quilts you can look forward to making in this series.
Hello, I'd like to welcome you to the new quilting series entitled Learning to Quilt the Easy Way. I'm Sharon Hultgren and I will be your teacher as we begin at the very beginning of quilting. The first project in this series will be the quilt that you see in front of me. I've called it 4x4. When we do this quilt, we will be using the rotary cutter and mat and the thick acrylic ruler so that our squares can be cut perfectly straight, and then we'll cross-cut them and into smaller pieces that you see adjoining the larger white piece. This will be a wonderful first project for you, and I know you'll feel good about it when you've finished it. The second quilt in our series will be the shoe fly. The shoe fly has always been one of my favorite squares because we can do so many things with it in color. Here you see it with sashing strips between it. In this quilt, we will be using the easy angles for the triangles and the squares, and then set between sashing strips and adding borders, and even learning how to miter the corners. This will be a fun second project in our series. As we go on and do something a little larger, we're going to do a quilt that I've called Fox and Geese. Doesn't it remind you of the game we used to play when we were children in the snow, running between the corners, one being the fox and the other being part of the geese? And here we see the large secondary block joining the block, and in the large block we're able to do our quilting. We introduced the use of the companion angle in this quilt, and you'll find that you're able to cut those triangles on the straight of grain. What do you like to see when you look out your attic windows? In the next quilt that we're going to do, we're going to make attic windows. And you can place animals in your window as we see here, or I'll show you how to put pieced blocks into the windows, or even a picture of your grandmother. This is a fun quilt to make, and it can be for anyone, any age, any occasion. Reflections is a favorite quilt of mine. It is also made with the large easy angle. As I look at this, I see the blue spruce just standing in a golden sunset. And believe it or not, we cut this with the rotary cutter and the large easy angle, all from one strip of each color. You'll be surprised how fast this comes together. The 8-pointed star is always a quilt that some people fear making because of the sharp points and the way we like them to come together in the very center. We will use the Easy 8 in this quilt along with the easy angle and the companion angle. What makes this quilt special too is the fact that we use the sashing strips in the same color as the background from the star, which creates this wonderful floating effect of the stars and creates lovely spaces for you to do your quilting in. This one I think you'll have a lot of fun with. The Easy 8 also allows us to cut pieces into 2 parts and then sew them together and have them be the size of the largest diamond. And you see in this block, this quilt that we call double diamonds, you see the wonderful effect of the double star. Now, If you can do an 8-pointed star, a 6-pointed star is going to be just a snap. It won't be any trouble at all. And I know you'll love the colors that can come out with the 6-pointed star. And then we fill around the edges with a star or diamond that's the very same shape. This quilt doesn't take as much time as you might think. Using the same Easy 6 tool, we'll be able to create this tumbling block quilt. With 3 shades of fabric, dark, medium, and light, this quilt goes together very quickly. It can be made from scraps or new cloth, depending on how you want to make it. And then everyone's favorite, Grandmother's Flower Garden. Many people have these in their drawers, not finished, and some are well worn. You'll be happy for the opportunity to create your own Grandmother's Flower Garden using the Easy Hexagon tool. We're so happy that we have new fabrics that look like old fabrics, so we really can make it look like Grandmother's Flower Garden. And then the final quilt in our project series will be Inner City. You're going to be surprised how much fun this is to make, and I promise you the city will never look the same again. Well, these are the projects that we have planned for you in this new exciting series entitled Learning to Quilt the Easy Way. I hope you'll be able to join us. Hi, we're back again, and now we're going to work with one of everybody's favorite designs, and that's attic windows. I'd like to show you a piece that I made some time ago using dyed fabrics. It may look to you as you look at it that you think it's our lighting that creates the shaded effect, but really it's dyed fabric where the lighter fabrics are the top and then go into the dark fabrics on the bottom. Part of the fun of making attic windows is deciding what you're going to put into the window. In this particular quilt, I took a floral background to create the window, and I hope that you think that you're looking right through a garden window where you're looking through the window out into a lovely garden. Really, the garden pieces are just small little 2-inch squares. I'd like to show you some more attic window quilts. Sometimes we can take attic windows and set a pieced block into it. Here we have an attic window that has the friendship star sitting in the corner. This quilt is from my new book, Traditional Quilts number 2, and I've called this quilt From My Attic Window. If you'd like to see the stars come out at some night, then you might like to put stars into the window of your attic window quilt. So this is a pieced block inside the frame of an attic window. Another one is where we have used the attic window block to frame family pictures. Some of you have done quilts where you've used family pictures and stuff, and you can take your attic window and go around the portraits of members of your family, and that's a lot of fun as well. You can also tell a story with your attic window frames. This is a piece that I made for our son while he was overseas, and I wanted to remind him of where he had come from. And so we used pine trees and cabins and framed the attic window around each one. I also set sashing strips between the blocks so that it really gives you the effect of looking through the window. So there you can see you can tell a story with the attic window. And then one of our favorite is when we can put animals into the windows. And the children love this quilt. This just looks like it should hang in a little boy's room, full of tigers and elephants and zebras. And here we cut, again, the windows are simply framing the fabric print. And this is the one we're going to make together today. I'll set this over here and we can begin. Now, the first thing we want to do is cut the strips for the attic window frame. We're going to use 2 fabrics that look nice together, the deeper print and then the lighter solid. As you plan your quilt, you want to be sure that these contrast enough to give that depth perception that you get when you're looking for an attic window. I'm cutting the strips 2 1/2 inches wide. So we'll open up our fabric, put the folded edge on our right side, line it up with the grid on the board, and we have it nice and straight across the bottom, so we don't have to straighten that again. Then I'm going to take the quick line, set it onto the fabric, leave 1/2 inch of the quick line off of the fabric, so now I have 2 1/2 inches. Hold down on the tool and cut the strip. Just like that. Now, we put that together with the other piece of fabric. Something very important that you want to be careful of is that whatever fabric you start with when you put these two pieces together, that you continue with that strip always being on the top. And the reason is, if you'll notice, when I lay this down, when I create my attic window shape here and turn it that way, I have the darker gold here and the lighter gold on the bottom. Now let's turn it the other way around, and I think I can show you by just using the other end of the strips. Now when my darker piece is on the top, when I open it, I have a different piece. They exchange places. And so as you're making this, be very careful that your strips are always in the same light being on top of the dark. With that, we will start to cut our attic window shapes. Now, this particular quilt happens to be an 8-inch block, 2 inches for frame, and then the block that I set in is 6 inches. And so I will cut my first pieces from the 2 1/2 inch strip using the large easy angle. The first thing we'll do is cut off the selvage edge, just like that. Now, I'm going to take the easy angle and I'm going to spot 8 1/2 inches on the easy angle, and it's right there. We know that the block is 8-inch finished, so we need 8 1/2 inches for the length of our strip. So I'll set that on the fabric. I slide this down to where 8 1/2 inches is right there in the corner. Hold down on the tool and cut the diagonal edge, just like that, and it's ready to sew. For the next cutting, I turn the tool over, again, just like a page in the book, and this time, the 8 1/2 is right here. Watch, I'm going to turn that again, and you'll see that we're using the same numbers each time. This time, the 8 1/2 is right there, and as I turn the tool, the 8 1/2 is up there now. So I'm going to bring the tool over to our strips of fabric that are still right sides together, slide it up so the 8 1/2 is on the fabric right there, and the rest of the strip just sets right in. And you can tell, you can see the perfectly straight lines. You have your diagonal line there, so we know it's setting right where it should be. Hold down on the tool and cut the straight edge, and your next piece is cut. Then just bring it across and continue on down the strip until you've used the strip or cut as many squares as you need. Now once again, I'm going to flip this back, drop the bottom edge of the tool onto the bottom edge of the strip, slide it over so 8 1/2 is in the corner, hold down on the tool and cut the diagonal. Then turn the page in the book and drop the tool down so that the 8 1/2 is on the fabric right up there. It sets on just perfectly, and cut that. Now they're ready to sew. And if I open these up, you will notice that I have my attic window shapes ready to be pieced, just like that. So now we'll go to the sewing machine and we can sew those. Okay, now we're ready to cut the squares for the windows. As I mentioned before, we can use a large floral, and they really look wonderful. So don't hesitate to look at the larger florals and realize that you're just going to see a garden off into the distance. Also, if you enjoy hand quilting or machine quilting, think about using a light, solid fabric in the window and featuring your quilting in that spot, because the quilting always stands out beautifully on light fabric. That's another option for your window. But today we're going to use this animal print so that we can see animals in our window. So the first thing we want to do is open the fabric, and we'll put the folded edge on our right-hand side and put the folded edge right along the red grid line on the mat. Now we'll straighten the bottom edge by taking the long ruler and connecting this red line on that side with that red line on my right-hand side, and we'll make our cut across, just like that. Now, we need to cut our window 6 1/2 inches square because our whole block was 8 1/2 inches, and so we have 2 inches in the window frame, so now we need a 6 1/2 inch square. My favorite way to cut a 6 1/2 inch strip is simply to take and count on the board and then add a 1/2 inch. So I would count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then put a 1/2 inch more on using the 1/2 inch mark on my ruler. I'll do that again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then a 1/2 inch with the ruler. So we'll hold down on the ruler and cut across the fabric. Now we need to cut our squares, and we'll use the large easy angle for that. First we'll cut the selvage edge off again. We don't want printing on our fabric, on the top of our quilt, I mean. Okay, now this is going to be a 6 1/2 inch square. So once again, the 6 1/2 inch that we see there with the black tip pointed toward our body will give us a square. So I set the easy angle down with the 6 1/2 inch in the corner, squared up here, it's square across the bottom, and now I can cut my 6 1/2 inch square. Now, if you would really like to center the animals, if you would really like to see a whole lion's face, a whole elephant's head, you can cut this more carefully where you center the squares. You will waste some fabric that way, but it does feature each animal in the window. This looks more like the animals are just walking by the window. So let's continue to cut a couple more squares. 6 1/2 inch in the corner, hold down on the tool, and cut our straight edge. And I think we can get one more from this strip. 6 1/2 inch in the corner, and cut along the straight edge. Now, the one thing that I caution you about is that because we're putting pieces of fabric between our windows, you have to be careful, and I'm going to turn this around so that the tiger will be looking you right in the eye. If that tiger is looking at you and I suddenly put windows between him, do you see suddenly our tiger has gotten very long? And so because of that, we won't put the other part of the tiger there. We'll put another block, and then the tiger won't appear to be so long. So just stagger the blocks after you cut them. Well, I'm ready to set the windows into the window walls. Let's go. Okay, now let's set the windows into the window frames. The first thing we have to do is sew this diagonal corner. And the trick here is to remember not to sew at the very beginning of that edge of the strip. We want to begin a 1/4 inch down. Let me show you how to mark that if you've not done this before. I like to take a pencil and my easy angle and mark the seam allowance on this edge of the piece and also on this edge of the piece. Watch as I do that. I'll take the easy angle, bring it over to the fabric, and you notice that this time most of the easy angle is off of the fabric. Only the 1/4 inch seam allowance that's marked on the easy angle is on the fabric. So I'm going to hold down on the tool and mark this with a pencil. Remember not to use a ballpoint pen. We want to just use a pencil. And now I'm going to turn the corner and mark this edge as well. Again, the 1/4 inch seam allowance is on the fabric. Also, if you're a hand piecer, you can still cut the fabric out with the easy tools and then mark your edges, and I could hand piece on these marks as well. Now, the place where these marks intersect, that is called the seam intersection, and it's right there that I want to begin stitching. So as I bring this window frame over to the sewing machine, I'm going to gently set my sewing machine needle right into that spot. Now, some people might like to reinforce that by going back and forth, but I believe you have to know your sewing machine very well because some machines take a back step before they come forward, and we want it to be just from that exact point coming forward. So set the presser foot down and begin to stitch. We'll come right down. Now as you come into this fine point, be sure that you stay on the 1/4 inch seam allowance. Don't come over and start to divide that point in half or your piece won't stay square. Just like that. Okay, we'll cut the threads. And I like to cut this thread that we started off with back to about, 1.5 to 2 inches, and we'll just leave it be there. Now, all we have to do is open the window. And we turn it this way because our window picture is going to set in right like that. We take the picture and turn it over, match the top edge of the picture to the window frame, just like that, and I'm going to begin stitching off the edge and come down. 1/4 inch seam allowance. Stitching right down, carefully setting this on there. And when I get down to a 1/4 inch from the bottom edge, I'm going to stop stitching because I don't want to stitch into that seam allowance. Stop. It is better to take one too many stitches, though, than have to try to put a stitch back in. Okay, now I'm going to open the window and close the door. I'll do that again. I'm going to give it a 1/4. Here's how I've just sewn it. I'm going to give it a 1/4 turn. I'm going to open the window and close the door. I just fold that right over. Now, after I folded that over, if you pick this up and you see how it's kind of bunched down there, if you take your finger and go in there and just kind of pull all the seam allowances down, they won't get caught when you sew this final seam. Then once again, I match the top edge, and you see it just lays there just perfectly, and I stitch. Now, the reason that I always sew from the outside toward the center is because I think it's important that the outside edges are even. Otherwise, you'll have a tendency to want to trim it off, and we shouldn't have to do any trimming when we're carefully and accurately sewing. Stitch right down to where those last stitches stop and stop. Pull it away from the machine and clip your threads. And guess what? Now all we have to do is press. Press the seam allowance towards the window. So we'll bring it over here, lay it on the ironing board, and press that just like that. And just like that, our window is complete. Not difficult at all. Now you can put many more animals into your window and make many more animal windows. Put them together in as large as you want your quilt to be. One thing you'll notice on the completed quilt is that there is a dark border that goes around the entire edge of the quilt. You want that thin outside border because it kind of stops the picture windows. It gives a place for the eye to say, oh, there are no more attic windows to this quilt. And then after that dark outside border, add your final borders. I hope you've enjoyed making this project. Hi, I'm really excited to show you this wonderful quilt that is made with hand-dyed fabrics to look like suede. And if you can believe it, all of these pieces are cut from a single strip using the large easy angle. Doesn't it just look like the blue spruce are standing against a golden sunset? I'd like to show you how to do this now. To create this quilt, I've used 4 strips of fabric, and they are in 4 different colors. I have a light blue, a dark blue, a deep gold, and then a lighter gold. Now, if you wanted to change the colors to where you were working with green and a beige background, or maybe a red background and a green tree or whatever, that's fine. Just know that in this quilt I've used these 4 shades of color. What we're going to do now is layer the fabric in a pile. So I'm going to open up the light blue strip and open up the dark blue strip, just like that. And then I'm going to lay the dark gold fabric on top of the dark blue strip. And then we're going to put the light gold fabric on top of the dark gold strip. And we're ready to cut. Just like that. Now the first cut we're going to do with a small easy angle. Very good. Set it over here and clean up the salvage edge. Again, we always want to be sure that we start with a nice square angle. So we take the salvage edge of the fabric off just like that. Now this is a 2.5 inch wide strip. So I'm back to using the easy angle the way it's always used for triangles. So I set the easy angle onto the strip of fabric, match the bottom edge of the easy angle, and I slide it over so that 2.5 inches is right in the corner. Hold down on the tool, and we've now made the top of our tree, just like that, and a little bit of the background. Now I'm going to switch to the large easy angle, just because now we can go up and make the full extension of the tree. And I'm going to turn it over so that the black tip is pointing toward my body, and I'm going to read the numbers again that are on the strip right along this edge of the tool. Setting the tool onto the strip of fabric, I'm going to find 3.5 inches this time. Our first piece was 2.5 inches. Now we're cutting 3.5 inches. 3.5 is right there. Cut the 3.5, set it aside, turn the tool over like the page in the book back to where we started, put the tool over onto the fabric, and if you look right here you will see 4.5. Now the number is backwards, but if I look up here I can also see 4.5 to double check that what I'm looking at is 4.5. Holding down on the tool, I cut the diagonal edge. Then I'm going to flip the tool over and cut on 5.5. Pull the tool so that the black tip is pointing toward my body. 5.5 appears right there, and it goes straight across, and the whole piece just sets right into those marks. Hold down on the tool and cut the straight edge. Can you hear our tree growing? It's getting bigger. Straighten out our strips, just like that, and we're ready to go. Now the last piece that we cut was at 5.5 inches, so this time we're going for 6.5. We'll put 6.5 right here, hold down on the tool, cut the diagonal, flip the tool over, 7.5. We put 7.5 right in there, hold down on the tool, there's 7.5. And one more piece. We'll flip it back over now and cut our 8.5 inch piece. Again, the whole number has to be on the fabric. Set it down and cut the diagonal edge. This we'll save for another time. Now, are you ready to put the tree together? Watch. We'll turn them over so that we can start at the top of the tree. Okay, the light blue we're going to put on our left, and the dark blue we're going to put on our right. And these are the background pieces for the bottom branches of the tree. The light is on my left and the dark is on my right. So then I'm going to go back up to the top of my tree, the light and the dark, and now we'll come and put the dark on the right and the light on the left. You can figure out what's going to happen, can't you? These branches to the tree are going to go here and here, and the background is in this place. Slide this down just a little bit and that up a little bit. Now we have the middle piece, and the middle piece, the fourth piece, works with itself. And so it's at this piece that we will join the two background fabrics to the blue piece. This one will go right there, and the light side will come there. Then our next blue piece will come down here, and the dark goes on this side, and the light, or the dark piece on top of the background, and the light background up there. Two more to go. Light, dark, and the dark is on the top, and the light is on this side. And the final branch on the bottom, the light and the dark. And you see how they just fit together, and we'll finish the top of the tree with a golden sunset right behind it. There. Now, when we sew those pieces together, we will pick them up, and this lays right over the top, and we simply match, set this right into the corner, and use our 1/4 inch seam allowance coming right down there. Now the other pieces, as you match those together, you have to be very careful that you allow for a perfect 1/4 inch seam, beginning to stitch right here and going to there. And you can check your 1/4 inch seam allowance by taking your easy angle, setting it on the fabric on the edge, and you will want the marking on the easy angle that shows the seam allowance to cross right over in this valley and end up right down on that point. Then you know you have a perfect 1/4 inch seam. If you should make a mistake and, for instance, match it like this, when it's sewn together and you turn it back, you will have a stair step. It won't be perfect. And so you want to watch carefully for your 1/4 inch seam. When you press those pieces after they're sewn, you will press them so that the seam allowance goes toward the blue piece. So if I were pressing this now, I'll press it this way, seam allowance, because we want the tree to come away from the background. And so I'll press all of these pieces with the seam allowance towards the blue piece, just as we have it here. After all of those pieces are pressed, then we begin to join the rows together. The first row to the second, to the third, and all the way up to the 7th row. The tree half will then look like this. Now here I think it's important to press these seam allowances going up. And I think it's because if we pressed them down, the tree would catch the rain. And so we want to press the seam allowances up because we know that tree branches kind of fall one on top of the other. And after you have sewn the 2 halves of the quilt together, then you want to bring the 2 halves together with a center seam right down the middle. It just goes right down the center. That is one seam that I think it's okay to press open, because then one side of the tree isn't higher than the other side of the tree. And after it's pressed open, you'll have a wonderful blue spruce standing in the sunset. Now, I believe that this would be a wonderful quilt in a den or a study across the sofa, or on a man's bed, or off to college, or maybe hanging in your cabin way up north to remind you of the blue spruce and a golden sunset. I hope you've enjoyed doing this project as much as I have. As we continue in our Learning to Quilt the Easy Way series, we're going to begin with the 8-pointed star. This is often feared by quilters because of all the different shapes. But I'm going to show you an easy way, and you're going to love making 8-pointed stars. The quilt that we're working with is the one that I have on the table. And you'll notice that it appears that the stars are floating on the background, when in fact they're individual squares that are joined by sashing strips that are the same color. I love the way it just looks like they're floating. And then, of course, the quilting design, when it goes, it covers over the squares and the sashing, really makes it look like one piece. I'm excited to show you how we do this. Let's get started. The secret to doing the 8-pointed star is the Easy 8. I've designed the Easy 8 so that you will always know what the finished edge of your diamond is. We're able to do that because, first of all, we cut the strips on the marked lines. And you'll notice that there are numbers in parentheses, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4. What those lines are really telling you is that if you will cut a strip as wide as from the top of the tool to that line, after that strip is cut, you will then have a diamond that is that size. So cutting on the 2-inch line over here will result in a 2-inch diamond as you see it here. Let me show you how it works. Okay, we're going to take the Easy 8 over to the fabric that's going to be the stars. And the first thing we want to do is lay the tool on the fabric so that the number 2 in parentheses shows. I bring that to the fabric, laying it on, we line up the line of the 2-inch, and I know this is difficult for you to see, but the 2-inch, except I'm going to move it up to 3-inch because that's what we're going to do. The 3-inch finished edge is right there. Hold down on the tool and make the cut right across that way. Now we have a strip wide enough to give us our diamond points. I'm going to open the strip, just one open. We don't have to have it quarter folded, but we don't have it all the way out either. So we lay the fabric on the table, and then at this point we're going to rotate the tool around so that we're working with the diamonds now. We've cut our strip, we're working with the diamonds. The first thing we do is set it on the fabric and pull it way over to the edge because we need to start our angle. So our first cut is wasted fabric in this little area here. But we hold down on the fabric, on the tool, and cut that diagonal edge. Set this aside for your miniatures, friends. Okay, and then pull the tool over, and you'll notice that the 3-inch is right there on the tool, and now the diamond shape just fits right into the lines marked on the tool. We hold down on the tool and cut the diamond. And these are double, so there are 2. And we slide it along, and we don't have to turn the tool at all. We just continue sliding down the strip. There's 4. Set the tool on again, onto the 3-inch space, follow all the lines, hold down on the tool, 6, and we'll make one more cut in that same 3-inch mark and cut again. Now, if you happen to be left-handed, you're also able to have a strip going off to your left and just turn the tool over. And you're going to look at the numbers on the other side, and you will cut with your left hand cutting this way and continue to slide the tool in that direction, and you won't have any trouble at all. Now, after we have cut our diamonds, we need the corners and we need the triangles. For that, we're going to use a regular ruler. We'll take the regular ruler and cut a 3 1/2 inch strip, and that's very important. When I designed the Easy 8, I included the seam allowance in the measurements, but when we go to cut the strips, we have to add the 1/2 inch for the straight part. And so we will cut a strip that's 3 1/2 inches wide. We'll take our fabric and open it, and you can put the fold on the right side, and we will cut a 3 1/2 inch strip. Set it out on the bottom. We'll take the super quick line and do this. First, we'll straighten the bottom edge of the fabric by just going right across from red line to red line, holding down on the tool and line it up with the red lines, and we'll continue our cut all the way across. And now we're ready to look for 3 1/2 inches. 1, 2, 3, and then a 1/2 inch. And remember that the fabric that you're cutting should be underneath the ruler so the piece stays very nice. Hold down on the tool and come all the way across. There. Now, from that, we're going to cut both squares and triangles. We will use the easy angle for that. The first thing we want to do is clean up the salvage edge. So we kind of like to line it up on our grid, and we'll just take the long edge of the easy angle and follow the red lines and just cut it nice and straight. Then we know it's squared right there. We need 4 triangles for the star. So we're going to set the easy angle onto the white fabric, and there you see 3.5 inches right on the tool. We're going to slide it over to the left, so 3.5 is in the corner. Hold down on the tool and cut the diagonal. There's 2 of them. Now I'm going to flip the tool over just like you're turning the page in a book and drop the little black flag right below the edge of the fabric, and 3.5 shows right there again on the fabric. Hold down on the tool and make your straight cut. Now we have our 4 triangles. So now we need to cut the 4 squares. We simply, while the tool is setting with the black tip toward your body, then just bring the easy angle over, and you'll notice that right in the corner again I have 3.5 inches. So I can hold down on the tool, cut the square, lift the tool, and just slide it over, put 3.5 on the fabric completely, and then we can cut the straight edge. And just like that, we have our squares and triangles. Now, I mentioned at another time that Darlene Zimmerman has designed a companion angle for us, and it also works with the 8-pointed star. And the way it works is that we're going to take this strip and we're going to cut it with the Easy 8, and I'm going to cut it on the 3-inch marking. So if I bring the tool onto the strip of fabric, and now you can really see the lines on the white, and you notice where it says 3 inches right there. That's reminding me that the diamond has a 3-inch finished edge. I'll hold down on the tool and cut the strip, and then using the companion angle, I can set the companion angle onto the strip just like this. Hold down on the tool and cut. And what this allows is that now the triangle, cutting with Darlene's tool, gives us a straight edge out here on the edge of the long edge of the triangle, where with the easy angle, the long edge is on the bias. And so if you want your triangles to have a firmer outside, you'll want to use the companion angle in that place on the 8-pointed star. Now, one other thing that I mentioned was the sashing strips. So another cut that we will make, now I have made it and I'll show you where it goes, and that's the sashing strip that falls between the stars, and it's 2 inches wide. So we'll cut the 2-inch strip to go between the stars. One other thing, if you notice on the quilt that I'm showing you, that we have some stars that have a black point. And that just is kind of fun to mix the two. The process is no different than I'm going to show you at the sewing machine. It's just that we introduce a second color, and it just adds some interest and some excitement to the quilt. Well, I'm ready to sew. Are you ready to come with me? All right, now we're ready to put the star together. The first thing I'd like to show you is a little trick that one of my students showed me. And that is, we need to always begin at the seam intersection on the edge right here. Now, in order to have that be the same each time, we learned this little trick. If we first mark the edges so that you're sure that you know where the 1/4-inch seam is, we'll mark each side using the easy angle 1/4-inch seam allowance mark. And when I do that, I can see that right there is where my seam intersection is. Now I will take that spot and set the sewing machine needle right into that place, just like that. Drop the presser foot down. Now I have a perfect 1/4-inch seam allowance coming toward my body, and this part that sticks back here, watch what I can do. I'll take a piece of masking tape and lay it right behind the star point so that all of the points after that will be perfect, because it becomes like a template, and I just have to start each piece with the fabric following the tape line. Isn't that wonderful? It's fun when you're teaching. We often learn more from our students maybe than the students learn from us. So now I'm going to begin sewing down. The most critical thing about sewing an 8-pointed star is that you maintain a 1/4-inch seam allowance all the way down to that point. Sometimes we think it's a piece of pie, and as we get to that skinny place, we're supposed to share halves. No way. Keep your 1/4-inch seam allowance all the way down. And so we begin stitching. And this seam we're going to completely close. Pull it back and then go with the next piece. Again, because something's going to be set into that, we can't begin stitching at the edge. We have to begin stitching a 1/4 inch in. But we can come and use our template. You see how it just sets right in there? And we know exactly where to begin stitching. Pull it back and do the next one. There, now we have finished our 4th pair. Now we'll bring them to the sewing machine and press them. First of all, as I clip them apart, you'll want to leave the thread that is coming from the wide angle, or where we began stitching a 1/4 inch in. Leave that thread longer. So as you clip, always clip closest to the narrow point. You'll notice too that I used a dark thread in here. Your points will look better as they come together if you have some dark thread, because often it's the thread that stands out and it isn't that your points don't come together nicely. Okay, and we go to the sewing machine, or to the ironing board. Now, I'm going to turn these so that the seam is in my left hand again. So turn that over and bring them to the ironing board. And again, we want all the seam allowances to go towards the left. And when we're looking at the top side, we want to iron from the top side. So watch as I pick this piece up, I bring it to the ironing board and let the iron just roll that seam over. You see how that went to that direction? Okay, let's do the next one. Pick up the point and bring it to the board and let the iron just roll that edge over. And you always iron each pair this way, and the reason is so that when you come to setting the square in afterwards, you don't have a problem with the seam being in the way. There, all the pieces are ironed. Now we're ready to put the pairs together. We will put 2 next to the other 2. Now, if you can look, you will notice here that the seam allowance on this pair is going to my left, and the seam allowance on the other pair is going to my right. And because they're doing that, I can let them, they'll really snuggle right up here in the point. Now, another little trick. Before I would always stitch coming from the edge and stitch right through there. But I've learned that if I begin my stitching right at that stitching line and come down, then when my star is all finished, I'll show you on the back of this piece that I've done, I'm able to flare out that center, and the center is much flatter and is much nicer to quilt. But you have to, back here, right here where I'm showing you, you must start stitching right on that seam line and come down. I'll show you what I mean. We'll bring this pair to the machine and set the needle right into that stitching line. And then come down. What that does, it leaves it open above there so that when you come to press, you can flare it out. Now when I'm coming down, I must stop a 1/4 inch from that edge, because again, that's a place I'm going to set something into. So we'll do that, and then we'll do the other pair. Right sides together, get the seams so that they just snuggle. Begin stitching at the seam line, set the needle into it, and then drop the presser foot and stop a 1/4 inch from the wide angled end down here. Come up and stop and pull it away. Leave a little thread on this one because again, you've not backstitched there, and we don't backstitch because if we need to lift a thread out, it's much easier if you're not backstitched. I should mention, someone asked me one time how long your sewing stitches should be. Someone else mentioned the same width as your seam ripper. Hopefully we don't have to use those. All right, as we open this piece, we also go to the ironing board and we continue with the seam allowance going toward your left as you're looking at the top of the piece. So we bring it to the ironing board, we let the iron roll that seam right over. Okay, grab the other one, pick it up, and let it just roll the seam right over. See how nice and flat that lays? And it's because we've used a perfect quarter-inch seam and our pieces have been accurately cut. Now we're ready to put the top half together with, we can say, the other half or the bottom half. And once again, if you notice, all of the seams are going in this direction on this side, and they're going the opposite direction underneath. So once again, the pieces shall just snuggle in here. You can just feel it with your thumb. Now I like to put a pin in just to make sure. There's a lot of things happening right at that point, and we want all those seam allowances to stay exactly the way we've pressed them. So I like to put a pin right in there. And you notice if when we come out here, see how the pieces have perfectly matched each other. So we don't have to pin there. We'll go back to our little template, set the diamond right in where it belongs, just like that, and begin stitching. Hang on. And then take the pin out just as you're coming to the center there, because you don't want to sew over the pin. Go all the way through, and when you get down here, stop a quarter-inch from the end and pull it away. Clip your thread and then peek and see how your point is. Ah, just fine. Okay, now when you're ready to press this, you will continue to flare the seams so they're all going in the same direction, and that little point just flattens down. And that's how we've done our star. Now we need to set the squares and triangles into the star. I'm going to press this just a little bit so that it stays nicely as we put in our corners and our triangles. Now, the first thing I like to do is put my squares into the corners, into the four corners. We have 4 corners that have squares and 4 corners, or 4 parts that have triangles. So we'll do the squares first. As you take the square to the place it's going to set in, you want to look at the top of the star, and you'll lay the piece on that edge. And interestingly enough, the little red part, as you see it now, that sticks up, is the same size piece that often when we're trimming our quilting things that we end up cutting off. And so the other thing that we can really be looking at is where our seam intersections are. And the seam intersection is where a quarter-inch is here and crisscrosses, and I put a pin right there, and I can put a pin where the seam intersection would be on the diamond, and it'll be just perfect. It's very important to understand seam intersections. That's how our pieces can fit together perfectly. And I will stop sewing when I get down to the seam, which again is at the seam intersection. And we sew down to the center. And we sew from off the edge. We come down and we sew right to where the pin is or where that other seam is. Then we pull it away from the sewing machine and clip the threads and leave them about 2 inches long. Then a quarter turn, and we open the window and close the door or fold this piece over the top. And I like to then just take my finger and just pull all those seams, get them out of the way, and then line up the top. And again, you'll have the same size piece just kind of hanging over the top, and we'll begin stitching from the top and stitch towards the center. Just one thread back here to get out of the way. There we go. Come right down. Make sure those edges are even. And stop when you get there. Pull it back and snip your threads. And when you open that up, get your seam allowance going the right direction, you will see how that just sets right in there just perfectly. Many people are afraid to set things in like that, but it's the same thing with the attic window. It's not difficult at all. So we would continue and put the squares in all the four corners, and then we would set the triangle in the same way. I think it's very important to press this at this point, because when you put the triangles on, you want to be sure that the seam allowance stays down, because you want to sew that with the seam allowance down. Now, for instance, this triangle, as it sets in there, I will set this back, line it up, and then begin stitching right off the edge, 1/4 inch seam allowance, pull this thread through, and when you come to the seam, stop, clip your threads. Now you'll notice that I'm not back stitching when I come to these end places. I believe that as long as we leave some threads about 1.5 to 2 inches long, that's just fine, because we'll be quilting over them. Where if we take the back stitch or try to tie a knot, if it's not in just the right place when we go to set the things in, then you have to try to lift it out, and sometimes those threads break, and that's weaker than a long thread. My little grandson loves to jump on the bed, and I figure as long as I leave these threads long enough and quilt it well, he can still jump on the bed and the points won't come apart. He probably won't do that much longer. And we sew again from the outside, coming toward the center, and stop when you get to the seam allowance. Pull it back and clip the thread. And with that, we've sewn in a triangle. And that also just sets in there just perfectly, and it's ready to press. Okay, after you've completed the stars for this quilt, the only thing that's left to do is join them by the sashing strip that we've cut 2 inches wide. And I'll show you again on the large quilt how the sashing strip comes between the pieces to cause that floating effect. And after you've joined the stars with the sashing strip, then continue on the outside edge with your borders. And this piece could become a lot larger. If you want to add more stars, you could make a full bed filled with stars. So I challenge you to get excited about making 8-pointed stars. On this quilt, you'll notice that the difference is that the 8-pointed stars have a little extra sparkle. And so we're going to call this quilt double diamonds, because you notice that the 2 smaller pieces are set against the larger diamond. We make this quilt again with the Easy 8, and let me show you how. The first thing that we need to do is cut the strips. And we will cut the strips using the Easy 8 again, and we will follow the 2-inch finished edge for the strips that create the sparkle to the diamond. And we'll turn it like this. We put the folded edge on my right side, line it up with the red mark on the gridded board, then bring the Easy 8 over, and I see 2 inches is right there. So I'll set the tool onto the fabric, bring the 2 inches right along the bottom edge, and then cut it. Just like that. Then after cutting the light blue piece, we'll also cut a dark blue strip, and then we simply sew them together with just the simple seam, and I like to press the seam allowance towards the blue. But now this is ready to cut in the same way that we cut the other large diamond that I'll show you in a minute. But at this point, we take the Easy 8 and rotate it and start working with the diagonal edge. I'm going to take the tool and slide it way off the edge, because we just need to start our angle. If I come here, it's too far. If I go here, I've wasted fabric. So I'm going to come so just the point meets the edge of the fabric. Hold down on the tool and then cut right along that edge. Now, if you remember, this one was on the 2-inch finished edge, so this time I'm going to look for the 2-inch finished edge of the star. Even though it's as wide as the 4, I'm coming over just to the 2 line, and the 2 is right here. So holding down on the tool, I hold down and I make this cut, slide it away, slide the tool down to the next position where the 2 is seen, line for the 2, and we continue down the strip this way until we have enough pieces, or 8 pieces for each star. And after they're all cut, to sew them, we just sew them together, coming together like that. Now the important thing when you're sewing them together is that when you bring them together, you want to match this point. You want this seam allowance to cross with that seam allowance so that when you open up the piece, it makes a perfect point right in there. You want that to come together so that it looks nice. Here's one that I finished earlier. And you can see that it comes together that way. Now after that is done, then you'll go and take the darker fabric again and cut it on the 4-inch line. And I know that this is difficult for you to see because the background is dark, but watch as I cut on the 4-inch line. It's easier because the 4-inch is the largest diamond that the Easy 8 will make. So we rotate it around, set the bottom edge of the tool because now the number 4 is at the very bottom. So we hold down on the tool and cut straight across. And then after that, it's just the same. We open it up, turn the tool, start at the edge, begin our cut, and then continue across the piece, making large 4-inch diamonds. After you've completed all of the diamonds, then you're ready to put the star together in the same way that we just put the other star together, the other 8-pointed star, bringing the pieces together, first in pairs, then in quarters, and then put the entire star together. Press the seam allowances the same way that we just did the other one. A couple of other special things about this quilt. First of all, you'll notice, if I hold it up again, you'll notice that it's sitting on point. I'm holding the square edge, but the rest of the quilt is actually on point. There is an easy way to figure out how to put something even this large on point. What we want to do is, after you have put the borders onto the center section, you'll take a tape measure and measure from one point all the way over to the other point. And for instance, if that measurement is 4 feet or 48 inches, you would divide the 48 inches in half and have 24 inches, and take 24 inches, add 1 inch to that, 25 inches, cut a square 25 inches, then cut that square diagonally, and those pieces will fit in the corner. You'll see further instructions on that in the book that accompanies the Learning to Quilt the Easy Way video series. You'll also notice in this quilt that I've machine quilted. This area has the stippling, and here we've put a pattern in. We have a new product, Easy has a new product called Stitch Through that makes this just a lot of fun. All I have to do is set the piece of paper on, pin it along, and then I can stitch right on the lines, and I haven't had to mark my fabric at all. I'm really excited about this because I enjoy machine quilting my quilts, and this is going to make it a lot easier. So again, you machine quilt, of course, after you've added your borders and after you've pinned it together or basted it in some way. And I found even quilting this large piece went very easily. I hope you enjoy making double diamonds.
For detailed directions, diagrams, and yardage requirements for the quilts, plus additional projects, please consult the coordinating workbook available where these tapes are sold. Also, look for the Easy Tools and other books by Sharon Hultgren in fine fabric stores and quilt shops. Please join Sharon on the next tape, 60-degree shapes with no math, to learn how to make the 6-pointed star, tumbling blocks, grandmother's flower garden, and inner city. Happy quilting the easy way.